Basically, Abigail Thorn said that gender dysphoria doesn't exist, and a lot of people got mad. We have to set the proper foundations for this, you know. Obviously, like, drama, in terms of, like, if drama's happening, this is, like, a very relative thing. The peaks of drama for somebody like Abigail Thorn are my nadirs of drama, you know? Like, a bad day for her is a good day for me, because I'm just used to so much more shit. But, you know, we compare by standards here, right? You know? She's even a far larger YouTuber than I am, so I feel like proportionally stuff weighs out. Basically, Abigail Thorn said that gender dysphoria doesn't exist, and a lot of people got mad. That's the broad part, okay? You know, she had a video recently on this. We'll lay the groundwork, and then I'll share my thoughts. This article says, when it comes to gender dysphoria, there has been little constructive dialogue, writes blah blah. Can a better appreciation of the evidence as well as the limits of medicine improve debate and practice in the area? And Abigail Thorn says, probably because gender dysphoria was made up based on unreliable data by a bunch of cis doctors, multiple of whom have since been disgraced. We shouldn't need some cis person's fantasy diagnosis to transition. The fact that we want to is enough. Then somebody replies, girl, what are you talking about, people? People are definitely feeling dysphoric. And then Abigail says, oh, for sure, and combustible bodies definitely release phlogiston, otherwise how can we explain the loss of mass? She's very bad at explaining herself. I assume that we're doing the, like, panic, like, the moment people, like, when you fire out a tweet and you see that people are starting to disagree with you, and you start getting, like, the cold sweat, and you're like, okay, you know what I mean? It's pronounced phlogiston? Okay, phlogiston, my apologies. Yeah, it's, people have been, you know, quite cross with her. And it led to some discourse. The discourse isn't major. I'm mostly using this as a springboard. This person, with all the wisdom and care that you would expect from a Twitter user, said, I don't even care at this point. If he's going to say my disorder isn't real, I'm not going to act like his gender identity is real either. He doesn't experience dysphoria because he's a cis man who transitioned for fun, so he doesn't think anyone else does either. Very smart, very wise, of course, very big brain. I saw a lot of replies were kind of in this vein, with, like, terminally depressive trans girls being like, well, okay, then, if I'm not valid, then you, and, like, basically that sort of thing, right? I saw that was, like, the main thrust of the you know, the disagreeability. I also saw, and I only saw this 5 minutes ago because I was, like, trying to find examples, that Destiny called her a trans trender. So that's also, we can throw that in, like, the bucket of wise Twitter responses, you know, like, good big brain engagement. So, hella dumb take. Annie, what are you talking about? How could you? Yeah. So anyway, some people are mad. At least a few people are pretending to be mad. And I wanted to talk about, like, why this is. Abigail recently put out a video. I think it was the video where she said, like, I called my gender doctor 5 billion times or something like that. I thought about getting a clip from it to indicate what point she was making, but I can't listen to British people talk for that long, so I'm just going to explain it myself. It was a really good video. I highly recommend it if, you know, if you can tolerate that sort of thing. It's a good video. It also took a while. I wanna get back, as we always do, to Dubois. Did I just say Dubois? Maybe I'm not rested. Oh my god. I was thinking Foucault. Did I just mix those up because they were both French names? I think I did. That literally, in my head, my brain just transposed. You pronounced it wrong too? Yeah, because Du Bois rejects his French pronunciation. So I was like 2 layers of wrong. Several multi-tiered. Okay, it's about Foucault. All right. Well, how did I? Okay, it's about Foucault. You know how ADHD people can be a bit inattentive at times. You know, it's in the name, attention deficit disorder. You know that? We've heard about that. Inattentivity is not like an ADHD specific thing. Everyone feels it, right? Like, that's a ubiquitous human experience. Everybody feels inattentive at times. People with ADHD just tend to feel more of it and more often. But that doesn't mean that the experience of inattentiveness, I think, actually, and yeah, it's inattentiveness. The experience of inattentiveness isn't, like, specific to ADHD people. It's also not categorically different, you know? If an ADHD person is feeling inattentive, that's not a different feeling than a non-ADHD person feeling inattentive. The argument that Foucault has made with regards to a number of our psychiatric conditions is that we've medically otherized some types of behaviors in ways that have caused us to develop negative attitudes towards them. How before, people who were autistic or ADHD were odd, but they were odd within a sort of confluence, a wavelength of how humans behave. But there wasn't the term autism 100 years ago, or ADHD. So the oddity was it itself. You know, there are certainly odd people who don't have autism, ADHD, or any other diagnosable condition, but there's something about naming an oddity. There's something about giving a term, putting it into a box that I think causes people to think of them differently. One of the examples that Foucault uses with regards to intelligence is that people used to have now this is a big generalization, but people used to have a kind of paternalistically affectionate attitude towards the very stupid. You know what I mean? Village idiot. That's not to say that very dumb people back in like medieval Europe were treated well. They weren't. But there was a kind of, at times, an underlying expectation of hospitality that would be offered to, that maybe like someone is touched, or maybe like, oh, well, maybe they're not good at this, that, the other, but they can be good at this thing. Not to say they were treated well. Not going to say that. But I think that the way they were treated was very distinct from what happened when people started opening up like mental asylums and insane wards back in like the 20s and 30s and stuff, right? When they started, like back when retarded was a medical diagnosis. The difference is that like the medical distinction on some behaviors served as a legitimizing mechanism for certain kinds of treatment. We did the same thing with scientific racism, right? Like, racism in an abstract, broad sense, that's been around for a long, long, long time. But our modern conceptualization of racism is heavily oriented around a pseudoscientific understanding of the differences between different types of people, you know? It's not like 4,000 years ago, it was, oh, yeah, like their genomes are different from evolution. Like, that's a relatively modern idea of racism. Now it's scientific, or at least it pretends to be. And what I'm getting at here is that while there aren't benefits to this kind of medicalization, there are sometimes downsides. What Abigail Thorn is saying basically is that the same thing has happened to the term gender dysphoria. See, everybody experiences something akin to gender dysphoria. It just doesn't have to be about gender. It's called dysmorphia, and dysmorphia and dysphoria sound similar. They're similar in a lot of ways, actually, but there's a kind of a hard line between the two that sometimes feels like it's nothing more than a respect for an arbitrary medical distinction, you know? It's not as though the term gender dysphoria is like, I'd say, very concretely rooted in a kind of biological analysis of the brain. It's like a set of symptoms and descriptions, right? Like, if you're diagnosed with gender dysphoria, they don't measure your brain or read your brain waves or anything like that. You talk about your experiences, how you feel, and if your symptoms line up with what people, we tick the boxes next to gender dysphoria, then it's like, okay, well, then you have it. That's why it's a psychological condition. You know, you have to meet certain behavioral criteria. And of course, a lot of the things that trans people feel about their bodies aren't entirely dissimilar to a lot of the things that cis people feel about their bodies. Though people get angry when this gets pointed out, as we can see in chat. And the reason for that is because, like, fundamentally, we're talking about an extreme discomfort with the relationship between your mind and your body, the way your body is, the way in which you think your body adheres to certain expectations for both you and from society. And in this respect, it's kind of a ubiquitous experience, right? I mean, we've all experienced something to that effect. Trans people obviously experience like a pretty elevated and very specific version of that. But even then, we know there are trans people who don't have gender dysphoria. So we're not talking about like a one-to-one criteria alignment. There are trans people who experience minor dysphoria and very severe dysphoria. And there are trans people who experience no dysphoria at all. And there are, of course, cisgender people who have eating disorders or who kill themselves because they're unhappy with how they look, or who break their body, exercising to look a certain way, or who get constant, let's say, unhealthy levels of plastic surgery and body modifications in an effort to capture some unrealistic or unattainable standard of beauty. And in both cases, dysphoria has been alleviated by both social and physical conditions. There are trans people who have felt their dysphoria alleviate as a product of like facial feminization surgery or bottom surgery. Like, yeah, we know those work. And there are, of course, trans people who have felt less dysphoric because they've been around people who are more accepting of their identity and their appearance. So it's kind of a wavy term, don't you think? I mean, right? It's a pretty big wavelength, I think one of the best examples of non-transgender gender dysphoria that you could fairly identify, and by the way, I'll defend to my death this terminology applied here, is guys with like penis size anxiety. I know it sounds really dumb, but I swear to God, to those of you who haven't seen this phenomena online, there are people who are literally like suicidally depressed because their dick is like 5 inches instead of 6. I don't know how to like describe like why. It's just a thing that is real. It happens, and a lot of it's pornography, of course, because you look at porn, it's obviously the guys are all really well hung, and then because people are all porn addicted these days, you go on social media and you see girls talking about how they love 8-inch dicks, not because they've ever taken one, but because the guy they slept with lied and said his 6-inch dick was an 8-inch dick, and like so it's like and it's like everyone's like running around assuming the average dick size is like a forearm, and meanwhile like it's not, and so there's a lot of like weird story, yeah. And if you couldn't call that gender dysphoria, I mean, if a trans man can feel gender dysphoria because he doesn't have a dick, I don't know how you couldn't say that a cis man couldn't if he's like really upset that his dick's not big enough. That's clearly a gendered like expectation of your body. We're clearly talking about the same kind of thing here. Maybe not to the same extent in all cases, but it's a wavy term. Now, none of this is to say that like there's no utility to like gender dysphoria or like trans-specific dysphoria as like a specific category, because obviously just because a broad range of feelings are kind of all like tied together doesn't mean that you would treat all of them exactly the same. For example, like depression can relate to a huge range of behaviors. Sometimes you can have a couple symptoms, but not enough for people to really say like, oh yeah, I think you're depressive. And it's like, you're kind of checking stuff off that you meet enough of the definitional criteria. And we don't treat all people with depression the same. It's not to say that a person who's like absolutely out of their mind depressed is the same as somebody who feels a bit sad one day, because they're both experiencing the same underlying like category. You know what I mean? Uh, but I'm sympathetic to Abigail's position here, in part because she did a much better job expressing it in her video, and also because I think what she's really railing against here is she's doing what Foucault would do. Foucault would argue, in this case, I think, that it can actually be unproductive to use gender dysphoria as a kind of like definitional gateway to being trans, because as we know, a lot of trans people aren't gender dysphoric, and it makes it sort of medicalizes the situation in a way that ends up like kind of affirming trans-medicalist ideology. The idea that that's like, oh, there's a specific term. And what's more, I think people would take trans dysphoria, like transgender dysphoria, more seriously if we acknowledge the fact that these feelings are similar in a lot of trans people, right? Like being gay and being straight, the feelings that you're capable of having, sexual attraction, arousal, love, whatever, are the same whether you're gay or straight. Obviously, you're just directing it at different groups of people, and sometimes not even, femboys, whatever. Trans and cis, I don't think it's as directly parallel as that, but at the very least, I think a little more of a parallel could be drawn. People were dumb about her tweet, unsurprisingly. Yeah, they were, but, I think it's, yeah. So CDRCH says, yes, Vaush, I literally used this logic to explain dysphoria to someone earlier today. If you're talking about dysphoria, right? If gender dysphoria is where the term begins and ends, pretty difficult to explain that to a cisgender person, right? But every cisgender woman at some point has felt some kind of deeply burning anxiety about the shape of her face, or her weight, or her tit size, or whatever else. And guys with the dick size thing, or like guys freaking out about not being tall enough, or I think that if you looked at that and you went, okay, look, we all have like at times, a desire to be different than as we are. And sometimes that desire is so significant that it causes people to get medical restitution, right? Like men who don't like their hair loss can get, a number of procedures to address that. That is absolutely a chemical medical solution to a gender issue, right? The, we haven't perfected dick size increasing technology just yet, but judging from the ads you see on the banners of porn sites, I think cisgender men have been pushing for that one for quite a while. You can go to China and have your shins broken and refit so you're like 3 inches taller, can't you? Isn't that a thing, right? Like the leg lengthening surgery, right? Vaush, read this for the segment, please. Oh, I think I've heard of this before, Tempest. Amanda Bynes, that's not a name I've said out loud for a while, fought depression and gender dysphoria while filming She's the Man. She's the Man was one of the biggest movies in 2006, and Bynes played the lead character, Viola, who pretends she is her brother Sebastian in order to play soccer at his school. Gonna guess that's her. The film was inspired by Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. While filming the movie, Bynes spent much of her time dressed as a male, which she later admitted took a toll on her body image and mental health, according to Insider. Bynes stated, "When the movie came out and I saw it, I went into a deep depression for 4 to 6 months because I didn't like how I looked when I was a boy." When Bynes saw herself dressed as a man on screen, she described the feeling as a super strange out-of-body experience. That's interesting, isn't it? I feel bad for her, but that is interesting, isn't it? Maybe a little bit informative. This is bullshit. She didn't look like a boy. It was a goofy kids movie with terrible costuming. Thank you, Meowshi. I feel like you're missing the point a little bit. I haven't seen the movie. Sounds like the John Money thing. Yeah, I mean, if it's possible to induce something that is undeniably gender dysphoria in cisgender people who still have their cisgender bodies, and we know it is, I think that would suggest that there's kind of, well, maybe a little bit of a category error here, something worth analysis. I'm sorry, I see a series of what I might charitably describe as counter-arguments coming from chat, and I'm going to try to reply to them very sensitively. Just a moment. Not going to ignore them. I would never ignore you fine people. Oh, the first message I read was unironically standing that tweet from Destiny Catface. All right, let's see. Body dysmorphia isn't cured with transitioning to an attractive person. They literally have different treatments. Okay, we can get to that. If you have gender dysphoria, that means you are impaired to the point to receive that diagnosis. To use your ADHD example, anyone can be easily distracted, but that doesn't mean you have ADHD. There's a chemical, physical reality to ADHD, and there is a physical, I'm seeing a bit of medical realism here, and there is a physical component to some people who have gender dysphoria as well. Insecurity isn't gender dysphoria. Why are we saying gender dysphoria is insecurity? Excuse me. I would say there's a heavy relationship between them, yeah, to the extent that insecurity kind of encapsulates discomfort with how one is. You know, if you use the broad definition, yeah. Not insecurity in like the day-to-day social sense, obviously. You know, you could imagine a person who is like perfectly at one with themselves in the universe, not feeling much in the way of dysmorphia, gender dysphoria, or anything like that. It's not like it's a deterministic thing. You know, we know not all trans people have gender dysphoria. Again, that's not to suggest that there's no validity to any kind of medical intervention. And what's more, you say that body dysmorphia isn't cured with transitioning to an attractive person, but that's not true. There are people who have like really burning insecurities about their bodies that aren't transgender, who get surgeries or medical treatment, and that actually can help. For example, people who have like crested upper lips, cleft lips, I think, you know, often feel like incredibly like unhappy with how they look, and they can get a surgery to fix that. You know, people get breast augmentation, both up and down. People get their faces changed in a variety of ways. Well, the difference is, and this is where we come back to Abigail's point, you don't have to go to a doctor for a diagnosis in order to get your face changed by a plastic surgeon. You do have to go to a doctor for a gender dysphoria diagnosis in order to get the medical treatments that are gatekept behind that definition in the medical system. And that's the line, isn't it? Right? You haven't heard, like, you know, you've heard this complaint before, I imagine. You can do a lot of stuff to your body as a cisgender person without a doctor having to sign off on it. If you're an adult and you're, you know, you've got a wallet with money in it, and you're, you know, not declared legally insane or a ward of the state or whatever else, you can just run around doing whatever you want, you know? You can do a lot of stuff. I think part of this is because we kind of look at all that and we think like, oh, well, that's just cosmetic, you know? Is it? Like, people don't go after significant cosmetic alterations without any kind of underlying psychological desire, right? The desire to have hair plugs put in could reflect an insecurity or a deep discomfort in your presentation as a man. And that is a psychological factor that if you were being diagnosed for gender dysphoria, a doctor would ask you about. The kinds of things that a guy would say to a doctor if asked before going to get leg lengthening surgery and God knows where, you know, like imagine what conversation you would have with a doctor if you had to get a doctor's permission to get your legs lengthened, right? It wouldn't just be like, oh yeah, I want to, kablamo. Like if we're following by the standard of care set by how we treat trans people, it'd be like, well, okay, let's make sure you're not just chasing a trend here, you know? Okay, let's make sure this is born of an actual need and there isn't like another way of fixing this issue, right? I hope you guys understand where I'm trying to come from here. You know, it's complicated words. Even then, none of the questions be about fetishes. That's true. Can you imagine if, like, every woman who wanted breast implants had to be given a questionnaire on whether she had, like, a fetish for lactation or for having big breasts? Or like, if a guy who wanted, say we had, like, the medical knowledge to make penises bigger, you know, can you imagine the questions they'd be asked if we were following by the standard of, like, transgender, you know? I think like one of the best examples of this, so there's this guy called Ollie London who right now is grifting as like a detransition advocate. Ollie London was a trans trender, but the trend that Ollie London was chasing was not being a woman, my friends. Ollie London was chasing the trend of being a BTS Korean member, a Korean K-pop star. Ollie London was the person who got a bunch of plastic surgery in order to make himself look more like one of the BTS. I don't know their names. And now he's detransitioning, and he's like he's doing the whole thing on social media where he's like you know, look at how much damage transitioning did to me. Shouldn't our children be protected from that? And it's literally because this person is not mentally well. They were approached by like a conservative advocacy group and offered money in order to do this, and that's what they're doing. Like obviously it's that simple. Jimin, is that the name of this superfan who spent $250,000? Now, guys, did this person need to go to a doctor and get a gender dysphoria diagnosis? And if not, why? Because they needed it a load more than a lot of the trans people in this community, I'll tell you that much. There are tons of people who ruin their lives with ill-advised medical decisions born out of a deep discomfort with their body. We specifically gatekeep the trans people. And that has nothing to do with a consistent medical standard and everything to do with the social deviancy associated with being transgender. That's not to say there shouldn't be any kind of medical gatekeeping, for example. I'm actually perfectly okay with, in some circumstances, a doctor, you know, asking some questions or there being some consideration or some therapy, especially if they're lower than 18 or whatever. Honest to God, I feel like I kind of would like that for a lot of medical procedures that aren't life-saving. Right? Like, because if you actually think about it, it's like, okay, like maybe there'd be some benefit to somebody having like a little sit-down questionnaire before getting like $100,000 in facial like plastic surgery or whatever. I mean, maybe. I guess I don't know how exactly that would be applied. I don't want to make any strong statements on that, but I like thinking about it. If you start from first principles and think, okay, we have to set up a system where like doctors will interview and get like the mental well-being status of people before they do certain surgeries. Like, do we stop only with trans people or do we do this kind of broadly? And it's like, well, I don't know. There are kind of some like weird preset expectations here. With all of that being said, Vaush, you saying you want it to be considered as cosmetic surgery, I don't think the line between cosmetic surgery and non-cosmetic surgery is as clean cut as a lot of people think it is. And that's why I'm talking about this. For example, if a person has a severe facial deformity that could be fixed with a cosmetic surgery, the ability to do that may literally determine whether they kill themselves or not. Now, under those circumstances, could you fairly say it was just cosmetic? The truth is, for the most part, people don't go in for expensive procedures if it's purely cosmetic. Usually there's a psychological reason underlying everything from tattoos to hairstyles to pedicures. But we're talking different levels of severity, obviously. I'm just saying that rather than sort things by severity, we've chosen instead to sort things by whether they're trans or not. You get me? Minor trans procedures are gate-kept, while major not trans procedures are not gate-kept. And it's like, okay, yeah. Vaush, your keloids? Still have keloids on my right ear. And, while I am a generally pretty confident person, I won't lie. Obviously, having keloids on my ear now, I'd prefer they not be there. I don't think they're particularly attractive. I don't think about them that much, and they don't bother me that much, but I don't, I don't care for them. And their presence, if maybe if I was a little more sensitive about them, that could significantly affect my social engagement with others, my psychological well-being. But removing them would undeniably be a cosmetic surgery. So I ask again, like, what is actually the difference between the two? I know there's a blurry line. I know there's like a hazy cloud where we move from highly necessary, heart surgery or whatever, to not. But it's an anti-essentialization thing. I just don't like un like unjustifiably strong distinctions between categorically similar things. No, I mean, it was a surgery, but it didn't require psychological evaluation. I was trying to give an example to add to your point. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I asked because this could seriously affect whether trans people get their procedures covered by insurance. Oh, well, hold on. Obviously, I think trans people's medical procedures should be covered by insurance. Though obviously, even there, we draw distinctions, don't we? I think that stuff like facial feminization surgery, breast implants, hormone therapy, bottom surgery, like stuff like that could be. But what about like every single conceivable procedure that might in some way enhance the femininity of their body? What about liposuction to increase their hip to waist ratio? What about I don't know that much about plastic surgery. I'm sure you could think of like, oh, well, here's like 27 things now. Are all of them considered like essential transgender life-saving surgery? Well, better to err on the side of caution. And this may surprise you guys. I'm actually an advocate for free healthcare. So if we're really getting to the heart of my positions here, this wouldn't really be like an issue. But in the system we have now, obviously, I'm fully of the opinion that transgender healthcare should be covered. I just can't help but wonder if like there's a lot of other really really important stuff that could be covered as well that affect people in a way that's quite comparable to the way gender dysphoria affects trans people. And I'm only saying all of this, by the way, to point out that the system of medical gatekeeping for trans people is unjustifiable, it's wrong, and it's harmful. And also, the ultimate, like the fundamental model of what should determine whether or not a trans person gets a procedure they want is if they want that, because that is what we have for everyone else. The only question for Ollie London was, did he want it? That was the only question that mattered. Did he want it, and did he have the money for it? Psychiatrists do not prescribe cosmetic surgery for BDD. Perry Chan, you can't really argue against what I'm saying by talking about current medical practice, because I'm arguing against the standards used for current medical practice. Also, by the way, guys, if you're not just guys, if you're feeling really depressive, you'll never guess what one of the things that can reliably improve your life and lower your depressive standards are. Exercise. It's exercise. Not just because the act of exercise, moves endorphins through your body, but also because, generally speaking, people tend to feel better when they feel better about how they look. Now, when it comes to being in physical shape, there's no cheat code to that. You have to kind of actually exercise. No, I don't think that's true at all. I think I have explicitly heard from friends that therapists have encouraged them to get like a nose job if they were persistently insecure about their nose for like years and years and years. Like if a person's just been insecure about their nose and feels like ass about it and over, like just, and that's just consistently a thing. Like, and a therapist like the patient would bring up, I've been considering getting a nose job, and the therapist would be like, if you feel that'd be good for you, then maybe it would be. I've heard that before. Denial, no screen. There's a lot of variability out there. But isn't it a good indicator for the fact that non-trans related cosmetic procedures have a significantly higher regret rate? Or is that because of the lack of gatekeeping? Well, to an extent, gatekeeping probably does lower the regret rate. That is true. We just don't have any evidence to the idea that it would be like sky high without any gatekeeping. But additionally, that's probably also because of the like stories that we tell about a lot of stuff regarding cosmetic surgeries. I don't know. Doesn't it seem a little bit strange that when we talk about a transgender person getting... Oh, by the way, facial feminization surgery is objectively a cosmetic surgery. Like, I hope there's no... you can argue it's vital and life-saving, and I wouldn't disagree, but I mean, obviously it is cosmetic surgery. You're doing the same thing that plastic surgeons do with everyone else. And you can have a cis and a trans person who get it. But what's weird is like, if a trans person gets facial feminization surgery in a way that makes her more happy with her appearance, that's like a life milestone, Trans women will put like facial feminization surgery dates on their like Tinder bio, or not Tinder, more like Twitter, I guess. No, Tinder too, honestly. They'll be like, yeah, I got this and it's my journey and so on and so forth, and I'll read donations shortly. And when cisgender people get plastic surgery, none of this happens, like at all. In fact, getting cosmetic facial surgery as a cisgender person is kind of like shameful. a little bit. I mean, maybe if you're correcting some kind of like severe physical abnormality, not. But when I see people talk about cosmetic surgery on other people, I see, for the most part, people are quite negative. It's seen as vain. It's seen as self-absorbed and obsessive, and I don't know if that can really be justified. That distinction, you know? Yeah, even in Hollywood where it's normal, like it's expected that you keep that shit quiet, like under wraps. I agree with this line of reasoning for adults, but I think for minors it's a different story. I agree some degree of gatekeeping is necessary for trans minors, 100%. I've heard trans people say they prefer it to be called reconstructive surgery. I get that, Tempest, but that comes... I don't know if I necessarily like that. It's not reconstruction, right? Like, that's not what's happening. Like, that means a different thing. But then it's like, well, we're reconstructing the imaginary, like universally valid female face I had. Yeah. Look, okay, we're not, but we can't break every egg in the carton, okay? Does everyone get the point that I was getting at? So you're saying that regret rate for cis cosmetic surgeries is because of social stigma? I definitely think that influences it to an extent. The narratives that we tell about the procedures that we have done massively influence the way that we feel about it. For sure. Absolutely. 100%. I like, keep in mind, nothing that I've said here in any way, shape, or form, none of it indicates that I'm like denigrating the validity or importance or severity of transgender surgeries, cosmetic or otherwise. That's clearly not what I'm saying if you're listening to me in good faith. I've been such an active advocate for the accessibility of these surgeries. The only thing that I'm saying is that I think that we are doing everyone, cis and trans people, a disservice by enforcing an arbitrary categorization that leads to unjustifiable medical gatekeeping in one case, and also a lack of empathy, because it makes gender dysphoria out to be some unknowable, unimaginable construct that a cisgender person couldn't possibly relate to. And being able to relate to the experiences of a minority group is pretty important when it comes to facilitating like social integration and so on and so forth, right? So yeah, that's the point. Some requests for surgery should be replaced with psychiatric treatment, though, like the guys who inject oil into their biceps. You mean the synth oil people? Yes. I had these guys on my mind while I was talking about gender dysphoria in cisgender people, because I would find it difficult to imagine that anyone would do this to themselves for any reason other than a severe discomfort with like gendered attributes about their body. Obviously, like being hypermuscular is considered a masculine characteristic, so they've injected oil into their body. It's just balloons. It's not good for you, if you could believe that. Probably shouldn't do this. It doesn't sound like Vaush understands gender dysphoria, though, because he compared it to insecurity. Insecurity can be valid and needs to be addressed, but some people who are trans go way too far and never actually cure their GD because they have actual BDD. That is an unrealistic view of their body no surgery will cure. I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to, Perry Chan. Insecurity can influence the way people feel about their body, and a large part of gender dysphoria is the way people feel about their body. Obviously, highly insecure people will probably feel heightened gender dysphoria because they're more insecure. These concepts don't like overlap to each other or one to one, but there's still like a degree of synchronicity there, I think. Do you really think that in general, BDD in cis people is 99% as intrinsic / immutable and debilitating as gender dysphoria is for trans people? Hungamaster, not all trans people even have gender dysphoria. And here's another question. How much of gender dysphoria is biological and how much of it is social? Or to put it another way, if you took every trans person on Earth and set them down in the middle of an infinite forest where none of them would make contact with any other human ever, how many of them would feel an innate discomfort with their body, and how many of them, in the absence of any social critique, wouldn't? From what I can see, and from what I've seen, it seems like it's a pretty big mix of both, and it's really difficult to tell. Sometimes people are like the gender dysphoria, the discomfort with one's body is this like innate intrinsic incongruity between the way they feel and the way they physically are shaped. And sometimes it is largely or heavily, and from some people I've heard even entirely, a product of social ostracization, of being raised in an environment where your body and your behavior and your identity is considered invalid. But yeah, the reason why I don't like doing this, like, well, is it as bad for this group as it is for this group, is because I don't think the evidence we have right now justifies a different, an aggressively distinct categorization based on presumptions of severity. I guess to put it another way, like, if a trans person had very minor gender dysphoria, should that mean that their bottom surgery and their facial feminization surgery or whatever not be covered as anything other than cosmetic surgery? Like, if you could magically determine that they were only very minorly dysphoric, would you go, well, in your case, then never mind. This is all cosmetic because you're not that dysphoric. So yeah, like, you're paying for it out of pocket. Because that would be the logical conclusion, all right? If we could somehow, like, magically, perfectly assign everyone by these categorizations rather than going by group assumptions. To be clear, cosmetic surgery should be covered. Yes, in an ideal world, the term cosmetic surgery probably wouldn't even exist because I feel like it's born mostly out of insurance company bullshit. Are you saying being trans is not inherently genetic? I do not think that being trans is inherently genetic, no. You don't think hormone differences influence people's own perception of gender at all? Well, I did say there was a genetic factor, making it a bit more than social. Well, I did say there was a genetic factor to it. So by genetic, I mean like your body composition, the hormones, that you feel or whatever. I'm genuinely confused. How can someone be trans without first experiencing what the medical community calls gender dysphoria? Because you could theoretically, if you're not a trans medicalist, you could believe that a person could look like me and then choose, with no discomfort about the way their body is, to identify as a woman and then to live as a woman. Obviously, such people are not that common, but there are trans people who, I guess I would say, like, settle towards androgyny in terms of presentation and nonetheless fully identify socially as, a man, woman, or whatever else, which would indicate, like, the place where they want to be at socially and the level that they want their body to meet the standards associated with that place are not, like, totally synchronous. Does that mean it's not an intrinsic identity? No! I don't know what is an intrinsic identity. How would you respond to people who argue this line of reasoning extends credence to that social contagion theory stuff? I have a line about that in my ultimate research document. And by line, I mean 3 paragraphs. Essentially, my argument is that everything about a person's identity and beliefs is heavily influenced by their environment. Can you guys think of something that isn't? Legit. Dick size? People's comfort with their dick size absolutely varies. The Romans thought big dicks were attractive. The Greeks thought small dicks were attractive. I bet you that in Roman society, there were way more guys who were insecure and deeply, not just deeply insecure, people kill themselves over this, like, really unhappy with their dick size than they were in Greece, Like, obviously, yeah. I don't think it's all, like, borne out inherently. I thought this whole issue was behind us in the trans community. Thought most people understood that if someone wants to transition, dysphoria doesn't matter. Yeah, well, if someone wants to transition, if they're an adult, like, I think an adult should just be able to do what they want. Like, the same way it is for literally all other medical procedures. Romans liked small dicks and thought big dicks were barbaric. I thought that was the Greeks, and the Romans liked the big dicks. Vaush, being transsexual is an inherent thing, and it is not at its core an identity. It's a psychological thing where the brain sex is misaligned with the body. Yeah, I don't like that rhetoric. It's not as simple as, like, pink brain, blue body shit, right? In reality, like, if a person is interested in living as the opposite sex, getting all of the surgery and hormones associated with that, I don't think that is just born of, like, a defect in their brain. I think social factors can influence that. I think it's possible for a person who is, like, perfectly comfortable with their body to also go, like, wow, okay, I guess I'll live, like, as a female now because, whatever. Like, if you can imagine some kind of sci-fi future world where it would be possible to change your sex really easily, like, would the only people doing that be people born with a defect that makes them want to? Or would suddenly it be really easy and convenient and frequent for people to change their sex based arbitrarily on what they're interested in at that time? The social normalization of that kind of behavior would probably also take away a lot of the stigma. I have a feeling it would be quite popular. I mean, listen to how many, like, guys, cisgender guys, by the way, are like, dude, if I was, like, a girl for one day, I'd, like, squeeze my boobies. People in the trans community like to say, oh, those are all eggs. No, they're not. The honest truth is, wanting to be the other sex for a time, or, like, being curious about it, or if it could be a button you could press on and off, basically everyone would at some point press that button, because why the f not? because it's like a dumb thing you could do. Because you could like like if you were like born female, you could be like, I wonder how much it really hurts to get hit in the balls. Hits button, punches dick, immediately smacks button back, never touches it again. I don't think people. No, but like, okay, how do I put it? I actually think people who think that's egg behavior are engaging in a kind of transmedicalism against themselves. Everyone would do that. Like, if you don't think so, like, if you really think in a sci-fi world where you could hit a button and switch your, like, whole body and sex, that only 0.1% of the population would ever do that, that's a really dumb thing to think, I think, you know? The idea of being transsexual might not even exist in a future where that technology is available because, like, what would be the need for the social categorization? Just hit the button, right? Like, yeah, a transsexual is defined by a person who's hit the button an odd number of times rather than an even number of times, thus meaning that the button position they've settled at is different from the one they start. Like, okay, like what, like what? All right, should the trans people that don't have dysphoria have the same priority and access to medicine for those who do have actual dysphoria? Yes, I think so. I feel like this line hurts those who have dysphoria, especially with the hormone shortages. Well, you're the one arguing that, like, we set up a system of medical gatekeeping to determine dysphoria and then line trans people up based on the extent to which the institutional, like, medical diagnosis system determines they're worthy of that. Like, you're the one arguing in favor of the construction of a medical bureaucracy that exclusively harms and affects trans people. What, like, how else could one, like, a sorting axis of how dysphoric a person is or something? A lot of people are saying in response to Vaush, a lot of people responding seem entirely unaware of the existence of non-binary people. It's really weird, Arma. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's been a while since we talked about this exactly. But, well, I feel like if nothing else, we covered some interesting conceptual ground. Hey, Vaush, I'm a trans man, and I've been pondering this for years. Theoretically, a cis person could want the opposite genitals that they have and still want to live, be addressed, to be respected as their assigned gender, right? Like a cis woman theoretically could want a penis and balls and still want to be respected. 100%, yeah. And again, if there was more like medical variability, if it was easier to do stuff like that, God, how many cis women have I met in my life who said like, dude, it'd be so much fun to have a dick? They're not trans. We're talking like a large number of the cisgender women that I've talked to or been friends with at some point in their life have been like, yeah, that'd be cool. It doesn't make them trans. They're not going to transition. Maybe one of them over time, but like, no, that's just human psychological. We're just broader than that. I just don't think trans people are that different from cis people. I feel like they have an extremely, in many cases, not even at all, in many cases, an extremely elevated expression of some like negative feelings that people have, and that obviously like the restitution of those negative feelings, the alleviation of them, that should be like considered very important, very valid. But if we go down the scale and we start talking about trans people who don't have dysphoria, it's like, okay, well, are they valid then? Well, I certainly think so, because I'm a gender abolitionist. So, you know, dear Lord, here come the essay. But yeah, I feel like we've probably covered the topic about as well as we can. The chat, holy shit. Well, I'm glad people are engaging with the subject. Why is Abigail being misgendered by fellow trans people? Because they're psychotic. Oh boy, your emails are going to be fun tomorrow? Yeah, I'm sure. No, Vaush, I think you misunderstand the core problem for trans people. Is sex the social stuff? Is an extension of it. Rhino, you're projecting. Transsexual, first of all, we're talking about trans people, not transsexual people. When I say transsexual, I'm distinguishing like that as people who want to live as the opposite sex and don't just like identify as a gender other than that which they were assigned at birth. Transsexual and transgender are categories that often overlap, but they're not the same category like exactly. Like there are some differences. And I have said many times that there are absolutely people who have like a hormonal or biological inclination towards wanting to live as the opposite sex. So I don't see what the issue is. Obviously, a ton of this is social. Saying it's social doesn't mean it's fake, by the way. Are we still, we're past the point where we hear social construct and think that means it's fake, right? We don't need to run down that gamut again. Obviously, something being a social construct doesn't make it fake. Our set of ethics is arbitrarily constructed. Like clearly, you know, if arbitrarity meant invalidity, then none of this would, then none of this would anything. Nothing. So like we have to. Vaush, but medical transition is extremely important. I would kill myself without hormones. I study sociology. Please, I understand the socially constructed aspect, please. Rhino, what have I said that invalidates what you've said? At what point? At what point have I said, like, there aren't trans people who need, like, when have I said that? What's more, by the way, Rhino, I don't want to invalidate your identity, but you should know this if you study sociology. You have no clue how social it is. Every psychological condition is variably social, environmental, and inherent, internal, and there's no way to tell which is which. Well, we can tell where things lean, but there's no way to go, this is 100% X and 0% Y. It's not possible. It can't be done. Any person with depression will have a mix of like internal chemical brain stuff and environmental stuff going on, anxiety, ADHD, and autism. Hell, the definitions of ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety are all directly affected by the a degree to which those conditions affect your social well-being. Like, that's the model for a lot of mental illness, mental conditions. It's, does this express itself in you to the point that it causes you trouble in your life? Likewise with gender dysphoria. Obviously, if you went to a doctor and said, this causes me no problems in my life whatsoever, they probably wouldn't give you the diagnosis that you were looking for. But it also means the line you're talking about, Rhino, was constructed by doctors, not measuring brain states, but writing down ideas, which means that there's a lot of arbitrarity and a lot of bias when it comes to how we determine whether or not something actually meets that set of criteria. We're really out here in the trenches. Maybe, Zany Druid. I'd say for the most part, extreme gender dysphoria in trans people leans more intrinsic/biological, while BDD in cis people leans more social. Do you disagree? Yeah, I don't like that categorical distinction. I don't think we even have the medical knowledge necessary to justify the idea that gender dysphoria isn't heavily socially conditioned. Like, haven't we talked anthropologically about, like, I don't know, like ancient Polynesian societies where there was a third gender of people who, you guys understand, I hope, that medical transition is a past century thing. The idea that the negative feelings associated with sex transition have been completely unaddressed for all of human history up until now seems pretty unlikely to me. I'd be willing to bet that people 1,000 years ago, in the right time and place, it's not like history is very transpositive, who, were transsexuals, who wanted to live as the other sex, probably could significantly alleviate the negative feelings they had by living as the gender associated with that sex. So if you had, for example, somebody born female who wanted to be male, dick and balls and everything, that's not on the table for them, unfortunately. But they can put on, like, I don't know, a cool hat, whatever guys wore back then. And I think we have like historical stories of like this being a thing that was done. And obviously in retrospect, we can't like draw the line between transsexual and transgender on people who died 1,000 years before either of these terms were invented. But at the same time, the idea that every transsexual throughout history has just killed themselves and the transgenders all just, dressed as the opposite sex, and it's been that way up until like the 1920s, just doesn't ring right with me. I don't think that's true. I feel like it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's complicated in a way that doesn't invalidate any of you people. None of you, I swear to God, please, none of you are being invalidated. If you have an extreme psychological reliance on like hormone therapy or whatever, that's fine. Well, it's not great that you feel negative. I'm not saying that, but that's fine. It's not, I'm not saying that there's not, I'm not saying that, I'd go up to you and go like, oh yeah, well, you're the same as somebody who thinks they should work out more. I'm not saying that, in the same way that while anhedonia and sadness are emotions that every human experiences, I wouldn't talk to a person with suicidal depression and go, oh yeah, well, you're basically like my cousin Ted. My cousin Ted, like, did a really bad job at golf the other day and got sad. It would, however, be correct to say that the sadness that my cousin Ted and the anhedonia that my cousin Ted felt would be the same kinds of feelings the suicidally depressive person has, at least part of them. The suicidally depressive person would probably have other emotional experiences wrapped up in there, just way more. But obviously sadness is still on the table, so is anhedonia. Weird sound coming through your mic. Can we pull up gender dysphoria in the DSM-5 before we wrap up this conversation? Perry Chan, what do you disagree with me on? Vaush, would you agree that even if we got rid of the term dysphoria and said it's not real, that still wouldn't make bongers or conservatives more apt to be less of it? Yeah, obviously getting rid of it wouldn't just immediately fix transphobia. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting that there is a parallel of experience and that it's worthwhile to keep that in mind when we're talking about standards of medical gatekeeping and for shared human experience. If I'm hoping to live as a woman socially and get top/bottom surgery, would that make me transgender or transsexual? By my definition, that would make you both. But I'm just a cisgender guy. I think a lot of people, including myself, are having a hard time conceptualizing this, even though I agree transmedicalism is bad and such. Living with gender dysphoria is such a hard-hitting thing, and people are so used to refer to that thing as a tangible thing that distinguishes their experience into going the validity of medical intervention. Can we agree, as I expressed when we began this, that ADHD people and non-ADHD people often feel the same feelings, the same experiences, just to different extents and more often? But we have a different definition for ADHD. Like ADHD has a distinct medical categorization. Because of my diagnosis, I get Adderall. But that doesn't mean that Adderall couldn't be helpful to non-ADHD people sometimes, right? Obviously not, because people shop for it on the black market to help them with their medical exams. So there's a line there. If the line helps us describe some stuff, but people are usually willing to acknowledge that, like, okay, well, ADHD people feel this way. Non-ADHD people also often feel that way. It's just like a difference in thing. I just want that same standard to be applied when it comes to transgender people, cisgender people, dysphoria, dysmorphia, this collection of words that we have, because I think it would be very beneficial in the long run to understand the relationships between these things. Are you taking call-in debates on this topic? Absolutely not! Is that a good example? Not to assume, but I'm pretty sure there's like tangible things going on with the prefrontal cortex development ADHD people. No, Yo Marin, you're misunderstanding. I'm not saying that ADHD people and non-ADHD people are the same. I'm saying that there's an underlying set of experiences that both of them have that are just elevated in ADHD people. They both exist on a spectrum. It's the same category. The feelings that they have are fundamentally the same. They differ in meaningful ways, but not in kind, not in category. Vaush, you taking nothing, nobody trans girls to talk about it, lol. I don't know what you mean. I'm curious, do you think a large number of people today who feel extreme gender dysphoria and a need to medically transition would not feel a need to medically transition or present as the gender they identify as in a society that had different cultural norms/gender roles than our present society? Yes, absolutely. I think a large number of people would feel a much lower desire to medically transition in a society that was more accommodating of transgender people and less gender like essentialist when it came to, well, a woman is when you have a pussy and a man is when you have a penis. Absolutely, I do. Likewise, I think people would be far less likely to, I don't know, kill themselves over their dick size if it weren't for porn reinforcing the idea that every man has a 9-incher or they might as well not even. I think that these are similar in kind, not in extent. I'm not saying that there is no difference between gender transition and feeling insecure about your dick size. I'm talking about whether they're referring to the same underlying innate discomfort with the way your body is, especially in this case in a gendered sense. Vaush, I don't think anyone in chat disagrees that cis people don't also feel degrees of gender dysphoria. Really? We are arguing, I think, that the degree of debilitating gender dysphoria that trans people experience seem to be more intrinsic/immutable than the casual gender dysphoria that most cis people feel to a degree. But I haven't expressed the contrary position. I've literally said that there is probably an innate hormonal component to gender dysphoria for a lot of trans people. And I haven't said that about cis people. So I don't know why you'd assume the contrary position. Okay, but a squirt basically cum? No, it's all pee. Based on what seems like it's a guess to me. Oh my god. These types of convos are hard to have because it's so personal for so many. It might always feel invalidating. Yeah, the problem is people in my chat love to have the sociological imagination until it's about something they're in. Everybody has a lofty academic interest in breaking down the fundamental modes of society and engaging with them until they're in one of those modes, at which point every personal traumatic experience they've ever had suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world, and I'm not considering it. And like, come on, we've all been here before. Remember when I was talking to that Playing with Fire pickup artist guy, and I was talking about how a guy's propensity to rape might be influenced by his politics, and he just could not get it? Well, look, as chat, as arguing with chat goes, this has been more productive than 99.9% of the times this happens. So, you know, I would say that Unlike transgender surgeries, arguing with chat has a very high rate of regret, but in this case, I don't. I love you all. I don't want to like toot my own horn here because I talk about trans issues pretty often. And I'd like to think that I have like a decent head for some of these things, some modes of sociological analysis. I feel like the extent to which we engage with these topics here collectively in this community exceeds basically anywhere else on the internet. There are probably some like specific Substacks, Medium articles, and maybe some smaller channels. And obviously, every once in a while, a large video comes out from like a larger YouTuber like Contra or Abigail. But we do this on a live stream consistently with no script editing. And I think that we maintain a very high level of discourse here when it comes to gender theory. And I genuinely thank you all for that. It's very nice.